Give me a house, or you will never see your grandchildren again. That is the sentence my new daughter-in-law said to me at my own son's wedding, standing 3 feet away from the open bar, smiling like she had just complimented my tie. My name is Walter Higgins, and for 6 years I let almost everyone in my life believe I was broke. What happened after that sentence left her mouth changed everything. For my son, for her, and for every person in that ballroom who thought they understood who I really was. I want to start by telling you exactly how pathetic I must have looked to a woman like Danielle Cross before any of this began. After my divorce from my wife Carol in the spring of 2019, I made a decision that nobody around me understood. I moved into a small $700 a month apartment on the east side of town, in a building from the 1970s with thin walls and a parking lot full of cracked asphalt. My neighbors were mostly retired folks living on fixed incomes and college kids stretching every dollar. I drove a Ford pickup with almost 200,000 miles on it, rust creeping up around the wheel wells, a radio that only picked up AM stations, and a slow leak somewhere near the passenger door that dripped rainwater onto the seat every time it stormed. My clothes came from the clearance rack. My boots were the $15 kind that fall apart after 2 winters. To anyone looking in from the outside, I was a man who had simply given up on life. The truth was far more complicated than that, and it started with what my ex-wife did to me. Carol left me for her personal trainer after 28 years of marriage, and the divorce did not just cost me half of everything we owned. It cost me my confidence. It made me question whether the decades I spent building my company from a 2-car garage into something real had ever meant anything to the people I loved. My son Ryan was 30 years old when the divorce happened, plenty old enough to choose a side, and he chose his mother's. Dad, he told me during one of the last real conversations we had before everything fell apart, you just let yourself go. Mom moved on, and she is happy now. Look at you. He was not wrong about how I looked. He was completely wrong about why. Somewhere in the middle of that divorce, I learned something that cut deep. The moment people know you have money, they start treating you differently. They start calculating what you owe them. Carol certainly did that math, and so did the man she married 3 months after our papers were finalized, a man who suddenly developed a very keen interest in her $3.1 million settlement. So I ran a quiet experiment on myself. What if the people around me believed I had nothing left? Would they still love me for who I was, or would they simply write me off? Ryan wrote me off. Our weekly dinners turned into monthly phone calls, and eventually those turned into birthday cards with a $20 bill folded inside. About 6 months before the wedding, Ryan moved into a downtown loft with a preschool teacher named Danielle Cross. She was 29, sharp, well-dressed, and the very first time he brought her to meet me, I watched her eyes sweep across my apartment, the second-hand furniture, the stack of unpaid-looking bills on my kitchen table. So you were a mechanic, she said, though Ryan had never told her that. Retired, I told her. Must be nice, she replied, in a tone that suggested the opposite. From that day forward, Danielle treated me like an embarrassing footnote to her future husband, someone to manage rather than respect. At family dinners she would toss out little comments with a smile attached, telling Ryan that maybe his father would prefer ordering off the value menu, or announcing that she would cover my tip because she knew money was tight for me. Ryan would laugh nervously and never once correct her. I was disappearing from my own son's life, exactly the way I had planned, except now it actually hurt. As the wedding date crept closer, I began to understand what I truly stood to lose. Ryan and I used to talk about everything: business, sports, the small details of an ordinary life. Every 70-hour work week I had put into building my company, back when it was called Higgins Industrial, had been for him, so he would have chances I never had. Now we barely spoke at all. The wedding invitation, when it finally came, was addressed simply to Walter Higgins and guest. No mention of father of the groom, no reserved seat of honor, just another name buried on a list. Danielle had been planning the wedding for 8 months, every single detail engineered to prove to their friends that she and Ryan were moving up in the world. The venue alone cost $8,000. The nicest country club in the entire region. Premium open bar. A professional photographer trailing them everywhere. Ryan was paying for almost all of it. His savings account drained. His credit cards nearly maxed. Also, Danielle could have the wedding she believed she deserved. Meanwhile, she kept dropping hints in front of me about what was supposed to come next. Good families help young couples get their start, she would say, glancing my direction. My friend Ashley's parents put 20% down on her house. The house Danielle had already picked out was a $565,000 colonial with granite counters and 4 bedrooms, the exact kind of place that requires parents with deep pockets to make possible. I knew exactly what conversation was coming. Ryan would eventually work up the nerve to ask his supposedly broke father for help with a down payment, and I would have to explain that I could not provide it, confirming every disappointing assumption Danielle already carried about me. But there was something even bigger sitting underneath all of it. Danielle had been talking constantly about children, how she wanted 3 of them, how important it was to start young, how family support in those early years would be essential. Children need grandparents, she told me once, looking directly into my eyes, grandparents who contribute, who are a positive influence. The threat could not have been clearer. Prove your value, or get erased entirely. 3 days before the wedding, Ryan finally called me. "Dad," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I do not want you to feel pressured. Danielle and I found a house we love, but the down payment is a stretch. If you could help even a little, we would pay you back." I could hear her in the background, coaching every word out of him. "How much do you need?" I asked. "About $113,000 for 20% down," he said. I told him I would think about it, but I already knew this was the moment that would decide everything. Either I would learn my son truly loved me, or I would lose him for good. The confrontation happened during cocktail hour, 3:15 in the afternoon. The golf course stretched out behind the country club windows like a painting. Danielle walked up beside me in a borrowed designer dress that made her look exactly like the kind of money she wanted everyone to believe she had. "We need to talk," she said, and led me to a quiet corner. "Ryan told me he asked you about the house," she began. I told her I had said I would think about it. Her smile turned sharp. "Let me help you think faster," she said. "That house is about our future children, your future grandchildren. Do you understand that?" I told her I did. "Do you really?" she pressed. "Because here is what I do not think you understand, Walter. Ryan deserves better than your example. Living in that dump, driving that rust bucket, dressed like someone who has given up. Ryan is embarrassed by you. Do you know that? He tells his friends his father has had a hard time since the divorce." That last line hit harder than she probably intended, because there was truth buried inside it. "So here is what happens now," she continued. "You help us buy that house as a gift, not a loan, because good fathers invest in their children's futures. And if you refuse, I will make absolutely sure Ryan understands exactly what kind of man his father really is. Selfish, bitter, a man who cares more about his own grudges than his son's happiness." Then she leaned in and delivered the final blow. "Nick and I want 3 children, and they deserve grandparents who add real value. Financial support, babysitting, college funds. If you cannot be a blessing, well, my parents live in Portland. They would be thrilled to be the primary grandparents." She had done her research on me, sort of. She knew about the company's sale. She knew about the divorce settlement. She simply had the total off by about $12 million. "The house offer expires Monday," she told me. "If we lose it because you are too cheap to help, I guess we will find out how much family really means to you, and announce your decision during your toast tonight," she added. "Show everyone exactly what kind of father you are." She walked away certain she had cornered a defeated old man. She had absolutely no idea she had just handed me a microphone in front of 152 witnesses. What Danielle did not know was that 6 months earlier, sensing something calculated underneath her sweetness, I had hired a private investigator named Marlene Ford, and I had an old friend from the Rotary Club sitting at that very wedding, a judge named Franklin Doyle, the same man who had personally structured the sale of my company and drafted my son's trust fund years before. He had agreed to officiate this wedding specifically because I asked him to be there in case Danielle showed her true colors. During the photo session, my phone rang. Marlene told me the paperwork was finished, bank statements, property records, and something extra she had dug up, 3 previous engagements, all following the exact same pattern. Everything was waiting for me in a leather portfolio tucked behind the bar, courtesy of the wedding planner, another old friend of mine from my company days. Dinner service began at 5:30. Chicken or salmon, $85 a plate. Then came the speeches. My ex-wife Carol phoned in a message from Phoenix, apparently too busy enjoying her settlement to bother showing up in person. Then Danielle stood, champagne glass raised, radiant under the soft lighting, looking every bit the sweet young teacher everyone assumed she was. She talked about families who invest in the next generation, about couples who get a strong start because someone believed in them. Then her eyes found mine across the room. Of course, she said, not everyone shows love the same way. Some people prefer to test relationships instead of investing in them. She raised her glass higher. To Walter Higgins, she announced, and the decision he will be making tonight. The decision that will show all of us what kind of grandfather he truly wants to be. The room went quiet in that uncomfortable way rooms go quiet, when everyone realizes they just watched something they were not supposed to see. Ryan looked mortified. Even Danielle's own parents shifted in their seats. She sat back down, certain she had just backed me into a corner with 152 witnesses as her insurance policy. I stood up slowly. Nancy, the wedding planner, appeared beside me right on cue with a wireless microphone. "Thank you, Danielle," I began. That was illuminating. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, people expecting a defeated old man to fold quietly. Instead, I told them the truth. I told them that Higgins Industrial had sold in December of 2018 for $15.2 million. I told them that after Carol's settlement, after taxes and legal fees, I still had $9.7 million left, and that I had spent 4 years investing it rather than spending it, until my liquid assets alone had grown past $12 million, generating around $400,000 a year in passive income. I told them about 3 commercial buildings I owned around town worth another $2.8 million, bringing in $31,000 a month in rent. I told them about a trust fund worth $2.3 million that I had quietly set up for Ryan back in 2020, fully vesting when he turned 35. Then I told them about the leather portfolio and what Marlene had found inside it. That the woman standing at the head table calling herself Danielle Cross had used at least 3 other names in the past several years, that she had been engaged 3 separate times before Ryan, always to sons of wealthy families, always demanding a house down payment once the wedding planning began, always vanishing the moment the money either arrived or did not. Photographs spilled across the table, Danielle at expensive restaurants with different men, always the same expression, always the same script. Judge Doyle stood up from his seat near the head table and confirmed every document was authentic, since he had personally handled my business sale and my son's trust fund. He added, almost gently, that a marriage could be annulled within 72 hours if one party had committed fraud regarding their identity or their intentions. The room absorbed that information like a second explosion. I turned to my son. "Ryan, your trust fund stays exactly where it is," I told him. "Your inheritance stays exactly where it is. Your place in this family was never in question." Then I turned to Danielle. "But you get nothing. No house. No trust fund access. No support of any kind from this family. And if you ever follow through on your threat to keep future grandchildren away from me, every family in this state will know exactly who you are and exactly what you do." She tried to fight back, insisting the documents were fabricated, insisting Ryan should not trust a manipulative old man over his own wife. But Ryan was not looking at her the same way anymore. He asked me one question, quiet and shaken. "Why did you hide all of this? Why let me believe you were broke?" I told him the truth, because I needed to know whether you loved me, or whether you loved what I might eventually give you. He flinched, because we both knew there had been moments where the answer was not clear. But I reminded him that when he asked me for the down payment, he had called it a loan, had offered to pay it back, and had called me Dad, not Walter. That told me everything I needed to know. Danielle made one final desperate attempt, telling Ryan not to let his father control him with money. Ryan looked at her steadily and said no. His father was protecting his life from someone trying to control him with threats. He asked her directly if the story about the other families was true. She refused to answer honestly, doubled down instead, told him if he believed his father over her then they were finished. Ryan said quietly, "Then we are finished." The marriage lasted 4 hours and 37 minutes before Judge Doyle agreed to expedite the annulment. Danielle grabbed her purse, told the room she never loved either of us anyway, and walked out through the country club doors while a few guests actually applauded behind her. The story spread through town within days, then further once a photographer accidentally posted a few unfiltered moments online. Danielle's teaching position went under review almost immediately, and she was placed on administrative leave by that Tuesday. Her landlord, discovering she had been quietly maintaining a separate apartment the entire time she claimed to live with Ryan, evicted her by the end of the week after hearing from several of her previous victims. Ryan came to me a few days later, humiliated but honest for the first time in years. He admitted he had let Danielle talk about my apartment and my truck as if they were proof of failure, and he admitted he should have defended me instead of staying quiet. I asked him what changed his mind. He said watching me take control at that podium had done it, watching me demonstrate real strength instead of simply talking about it. When Marlene called to update me that Danielle had already reached out to a new target in another city, Ryan made a decision on his own. He wanted to help the other families she had targeted before him, whatever it took: testimony, evidence, time off work. I wrote him a check that same afternoon, not for a house, not because he threatened me, but because helping other families expose a predator was exactly the kind of cause worth supporting. He stared at the number for a long moment before finally asking me the question I think he had been afraid to ask his whole life. How much is it really worth, Dad? All of it together. I told him the truth. About $18 million. He nearly choked on his coffee. 3 months later, we sat together at a quiet restaurant downtown. The annulment long finalized. Danielle now apparently running a different kind of con out in Phoenix under a different title. Ryan had moved into a modest new apartment he insisted on paying for himself, refusing the trust fund early, wanting to prove something to himself rather than to me. He was dating someone new by then, a veterinarian named Megan, who according to Ryan reacted to the entire story with nothing but concern for how he was holding up emotionally. Not a single question about the money. He asked me that night if I was lonely, living the way I still lived, driving that same old truck, shopping the same clearance racks. I told him sometimes, but that it was loneliness by choice rather than circumstance, because I would rather wait for people who wanted to know me for the right reasons than surround myself with people chasing a number. Then I showed him a text from Marlene about a 47-acre ranch just outside of town, an old farmhouse, a barn, an orchard, everything a previous owner had spent a lifetime building before passing peacefully. I told Ryan I wanted to turn it into something meaningful, maybe a retreat for families, maybe a place to teach young people real business skills, maybe simply somewhere worth remembering. He asked when I planned to go see it. I told him this weekend, and asked if he wanted to come along. He said absolutely. As we stood in the parking lot afterward, he hugged me for the first time since before the divorce and told me he loved me, and that he was sorry for ever writing me off. I told him I loved him too, and that I was never going anywhere, especially not during the years he needed me most. Driving home that night in my old rusted truck, I thought about how boundaries are not walls built to keep people out. They are fences built to teach people how to love you properly. Danielle tried to tear mine down with threats and a public microphone. Instead, she handed me the exact stage I needed to show everyone in that room, including my own son, what real strength looks like when it finally decides to stop staying quiet.